December 17, 1944, 0800 hours. Bullingen, Belgium. SS Oberfuhrer Joachim Peiper stood in the central square, observing his troops as they refueled their tanks. Tanks and fuel seized from the Americans. German panzers were being filled with American gasoline from jerry cans, under the eyes of American prisoners of war who were operating the pumps at gunpoint. Peiper was the leader of Kampfgruppe Peiper, the main assault group of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. 4,800 soldiers, 117 tanks and assault guns. His objective was clear: break through the American front, push westward, reach the Meuse River, capture the bridges, and divide the Allied forces. The attack had begun 30 hours before. Hitler had named it Operation Watch on the Rhine. This was the largest German offensive in the West since 1940. 3 armies, totaling 250,000 men and 1,400 tanks and assault guns, had been committed. The aim was Antwerp, encircle the British and Canadian military, compel the Americans to negotiate and force a change in the war's outcome. There was, however, a main issue: fuel. The German High Command had set aside 5 million gallons of gasoline for the entire operation. Simple arithmetic showed the panzers needed double that amount to reach Antwerp. The planners were aware of this. Their answer was straightforward: seize American fuel stocks. Take whatever was necessary. Keep advancing. Before the offensive, Peiper's divisional intelligence officer had handed him a map. American supply depots, fuel reserves, ammunition stores, and supply dumps were all marked. The information proved reliable. Supply points were scattered everywhere by the Americans. The uncertainty was if the Germans could seize these stores before American forces destroyed them. Bullingen represented the initial challenge. Peiper's Kampfgruppe had stormed the town at 0730 that day. The Americans withdrew so rapidly that nothing was taken. The fuel depot stood undamaged. 50,000 gallons available, sufficient to refuel Peiper's whole spearhead and continue heading west. American prisoners were manning the engines with the pumps as ordered by Peiper. His own troops were utterly fatigued after 36 hours of continuous combat. The prisoners were to fuel the German tanks themselves. It was a practical solution. It also degraded the prisoners, a psychological advantage Peiper found effective. The gasoline poured. Peiper watched the jerry cans being relayed by hand. Each held 5 gallons, and each tank needed 10 cans. 100 tanks required 5,000 gallons. Completely refueling would take hours. But time was scarce. Every moment lost gave the Americans more opportunity to set up a defense. Nonetheless, without gasoline, the panzers were immobilized, mere steel hulls on tracks. Peiper had learned as much in the East. The world's finest tank was worthless with an empty tank. In 1943, the Wehrmacht had lost more vehicles to lack of fuel than to Soviet firepower. Whole divisions stood stranded, tanks deserted, lines overrun because battle-ready panzers could not move. And in Belgium, the situation was similar. German logistics had faltered. The gasoline for the offensive was stuck behind the front lines, blocked by traffic, ruined roads, and daylight attacks from American fighter bombers. The supply convoys weren't arriving. Peiper thus had to capture American fuel or halt his advance. One of his officers, Hauptsturmführer Noske, came up. Noske was Peiper's aide, having served him since the campaign in France. Capable and dependable, Noske reported fuel reserves were lower than anticipated. The 50,000 gallons at Bullingen would only get them as far as Stavelot. Further progress would require additional fuel. But Peiper was already aware. His intelligence map located another, even larger depot at Stavelot. The Americans would likely try to destroy it or guard it. In either case, Peiper had to move fast. Refueling persisted. Peiper walked inside the captured facilities. American supplies, crates of ammunition, medicine, food, winter uniforms were neatly organized and labeled in abundance. He picked up a ration, a small cardboard package with a brown waterproof layer. The label announced K-ration meal, combat individual, breakfast unit. He opened it. The contents included a can of chopped ham and eggs, hard biscuits, a chocolate bar, 4 cigarettes, instant coffee, sugar tablets, chewing gum, a wooden spoon, matches, toilet paper, can opener. All that a soldier would need for one meal, packed in a box not much bigger than a book, weighing under a pound. No preparation or kitchen required, simply open and eat. Peiper had led combat formations since 1940. He knew the rations issued to German troops. Bulk deliveries needing field kitchens, hard bread, mostly fatty meat, and steadily worse since 1943. By late 1944, frontline units were fortunate to get anything. Kampfgruppe Peiper had started with 3 days' food from Germany and were now out. They had survived on whatever came to hand. Captured American stocks, food taken from Belgians, and in some cases, horse meat. Peiper checked the date on the K-ration. Stamped October 1944, so just 2 months old. Americans were making these recently enough that boxes packed only weeks before had already reached the front. Noski, his staff officer, returned. Peiper handed him the K-ration box. Noski opened the ham and eggs and ate them cold. Surprise was clear on his face. The food was good, far beyond what German soldiers had eaten for months. Noski looked at the rest. Real coffee, real chocolate, American cigarettes, as well as matches, gum, and toilet paper. Peiper remained silent, calculating mentally. If every American received 3 of these per day, that was 3 meals a day. With 10 million American troops globally, that was 30 million meal boxes daily, or 900 million each month. The industrial might needed to make such a quantity was astonishing. Germany had never reached such mass production. The entire German military industry had functioned for total war since 1939, turning out tanks and planes and ammunition, but still unable to adequately feed its soldiers. But here, the Americans were providing waterproof meal boxes with luxuries like chewing gum. Noski pointed out a further detail. Hundreds, possibly thousands of these boxes filled the depot, yet this was merely one supply center in a single town. How many such supply dumps did the Americans maintain? How much food and material did they possess? Peiper had fought in the East against the Soviets and seen their supply efforts mass-produced, basic but efficient, countless trucks, factories in the Urals out of reach. The USSR could replenish its losses faster than Germany could cause them, but even that massive logistics system seemed basic compared to this. Soviets supplied in bulk. The Americans distributed everything as separate, convenient packages. The Soviets relied on quantity. The Americans combined quantity with quality. Every ration or piece of equipment Peiper checked was cleverly engineered. Waterproof, compact, long-lasting. This was not hastily improvised, it was thoroughly industrialized. An SS Sturmbannführer named Werner Pochke then arrived. Pochke commanded the remnants of the 1st SS Panzer Battalion. Short of both tanks and supplies, his battalion critically needed more fuel and shells. Peiper replied. Fuel was being handed out even as they spoke. Ammunition would be drawn from captured American stocks. They had discovered cases of American 75mm shells compatible with their own guns. Take what you require. Advance without delay. Pochke inquired about food, as his men had not eaten since the previous day. Peiper gestured to the K-rations. American food. Take your fill, eat now, and carry extra, no way to tell when resupply would come. Pochke took several boxes, distributing them to his crews, who opened them and ate. Peiper observed these seasoned soldiers, the same men who had campaigned in France and Russia, treating the American emergency rations as delicacies because, in comparison to their usual fare, it was a feast. By 0930, refueling concluded. Peiper ordered the march to begin. Kampfgruppe Peiper formed a column, tanks in the vanguard, half-tracks behind, support vehicles at the rear. The column extended for several kilometers. Peiper placed his command vehicle toward the front. Their path pointed northwest to Stavelot, 14 kilometers, a distance that might take 20 minutes at speed on ideal roads. But conditions were poor. There was mud, fleeing civilians, wrecked vehicles everywhere. The Americans were retreating but fighting. Each hamlet had to be secured, every bridge inspected for charges. His map showed a major Stavelot fuel depot, even larger than Bullingen's, nearby, but the precise spot was not indicated. Peiper supposed it would be visibly obvious such supply centers were too large to hide. Many vehicles, storage tanks, sprawling across the landscape. Kampfgruppe Peiper reached Stavelot at 1200 hours. The town straddled both banks of the Amblev River, with a stone bridge at its heart. American forces were stationed defending this crossing. Peiper's tanks opened fire. The defenders, armed with anti-tank guns, resisted fiercely. The clash for Stavelot raged for 3 hours. Eventually, Peiper's men forced the Americans back across to the opposite bank. German engineers inspected the bridge. It was undamaged. The Americans had tried to set demolition charges, but they had malfunctioned. It was a stroke of luck. Had the bridge been destroyed, Peiper's advance would be stopped dead. His troops crossed over and entered the town's western sector. They hunted for the fuel depot. Intelligence reported it was here, with massive reserves that could keep them moving for days. They found nothing. Peiper dispatched reconnaissance in every direction. Search the outskirts, comb the roads, and investigate all structures. The depot had to be somewhere. The Americans would not abandon 3 million gallons of gasoline. They would either stand their ground or destroy it. Yet Peiper's men found no trace. At 1500, one of his scouts reported finding American supply dumps north of town, containing only small quantities jerrycans scattered about, perhaps a few thousand gallons in total. Definitely not the main depot, not what intelligence had described. Peiper made a judgment. The depot either never existed or had already been moved or eliminated by the Americans. Regardless, he could not afford to delay. His force still had enough gasoline to keep pushing, just enough. The chief objective was to reach the Meuse. Each hour spent idling gave up precious chances. Onward, Kampfgruppe Peiper left Stavelot at 1600 hours, driving west. In their wake, American engineers returned to the town's approaches from the hills where they had been hiding. Once the Germans had passed, these soldiers reclaimed control over the bridge. Stavelot would not be lost entirely. The Americans would maintain positions on the southern side of the river. What Peiper did not realize was that the depot did exist. It sat there still, 3,200,000 gallons of gasoline, contained in 5-gallon jerrycans, arranged in stacks alongside a 5-mile stretch of road. The second and third depots were 800 feet north of the route Peiper had followed, just 300 yards away. He had driven past 3 million gallons of fuel without seeing it. The Americans had not taken steps to hide or disguise the depot. The jerrycans were arranged in full view beside the road. There were thousands of them, equaling millions of gallons visible right there. However, Peiper had anticipated a fuel depot would resemble German depots. He expected to see storage tanks, structures, trucks, and other facilities. The American depot was nothing more than jerrycans piled up, waiting. There were no guards, no vehicles, no buildings, solely fuel in transportable containers ready for dispatch wherever needed. Peiper drove past, searching for something that looked like a depot. He never found it because his expectations were misplaced. After the conflict, an American historian known as Major Ken Heckler spoke with Peiper. Heckler informed Peiper about the depot, 3 million gallons just 300 yards from his path. Peiper simply shrugged. He stated he had anticipated petrol being stacked in public squares as it was at Bullingen. When it was not present in Stavelot, he presumed the Americans had withdrawn it. That missed depot changed everything. With access to 3 million gallons, Peiper could have refueled his entire Kampfgruppe several times over. He could have supplied other German formations as well. He could have maintained the offensive's momentum. The shortage of fuel that ultimately halted the German advance would not have happened. Yet Peiper never located it. And without petrol, his advancement was doomed. December 21, 1944. Stoumont, Belgium. Major Hal McCown was crouched in a basement, listening as German tanks closed in on his position. Macaulay led the 2nd Battalion, 119th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division. His battalion had engaged Peiper's Kampfgruppe over the last 3 days. At this point, they were surrounded. The circumstances were rapidly declining. German armored vehicles were in all directions. American defensive lines were collapsing. Macaulay's radio operator reported that German elements had made a breakthrough to the south. The battalion was encircled. At 14:30, German troops assaulted Macaulay's command center. There was a brief exchange of gunfire resulting in the death of one American. Macaulay, along with some of his staff, was taken captive. They were searched by the Germans for weapons and intelligence papers. Their personal belongings, wristwatches, cigarettes, anything of worth was confiscated. Macaulay was transported to a stone building on Stomont's outskirts. It was Peiper's headquarters. The house had sustained damage, shattered windows, and the exterior was marked with bullet impacts. Inside, German officers pored over maps and managed defensive deployments, as by December 21, Peiper's assault had stalled. His Kampfgruppe was besieged. No fuel, no ordnance, no supplies, no way ahead, no retreat possible. Peiper was positioned near a table with maps, tall, slender, 30 years old, with aristocratic features, and spoke flawless English. Noticing Macaulay, Peiper approached him. They possessed equivalent ranks. Both were battalion commanders, one from Germany, one from America. Both were career military men. Peiper introduced himself. He inquired about Macaulay's identity, unit, and command. Macaulay supplied the necessary information as required under the Geneva Convention: name, rank, and serial number. Peiper did not insist further. He appeared more interested in conversation than in interrogation. That evening, Peiper and Macaulay conversed for 7 hours, from 2300 until 0500 the following morning. They stayed in a room with maps and discussed the war. Peiper spoke for the majority of the time. Macaulay mostly listened. Peiper advocated for Nazism, explained Germany's reasons for fighting, and rationalized German decisions. Macaulay would later say that he had seldom met someone who made such an impression in so short a period. Peiper was sharp, knowledgeable, well-spoken, and entirely sure that Germany would triumph, even though they were surrounded, running out of fuel, and with his Kampfgruppe crumbling. Peiper was convinced of Germany's victory. Macaulay spent 3 days with Peiper's Kampfgruppe. He observed it all: the German logistics, morale, armament, rations, and medical support. He committed these observations to memory, understanding their significance. Everything Macaulay witnessed ran counter to Peiper's claims. Peiper insisted Germany was winning. Yet what Macaulay saw proved Germany was losing. German troops appeared spent. They had endured combat for 5 consecutive days with insufficient sleep. A considerable number were dressed in parts of American uniforms: wool caps, mittens, sweaters, overshoes, even overcoats. They wore enemy attire because their supply system failed to provide suitable gear for the winter. Physically, the soldiers were generally in decent shape. There was no evidence of starvation or clear malnutrition, but their nutrition was poor. Rations were limited for the Germans. Most survived on captured American provisions. K-rations, C-rations, 10-in-1 packs. Anything scavenged from overrun American locations. Macaulay watched as German troops unpacked American ration boxes. They explored the contents eagerly, reminiscent of children opening gifts. Chocolate, genuine coffee, cigarettes. These small indulgences, which Americans took as ordinary, were treasures to German fighters who had not seen such items for months. One German soldier showed Macaulay a can of ham taken from a K-ration. The man remarked that it surpassed anything issued by the Wehrmacht. German canned meat was mainly fat and sinew, required cooking, and tasted unappealing. The American ham was actual meat, properly preserved, edible straight from the tin. According to the soldier, if Germany could offer rations like this, the war's outcome would differ. Macaulay stayed silent. As a captive, there was little point in debate, but he understood the sentiment. Had Germany possessed the means to supply food as America did, they would have. Their inability highlighted their industrial deficiency. If they could not manufacture adequate food, they similarly could not provide other materials necessary for warfare. German medical stocks were drastically depleted. The aid post at Stoumont was bereft of morphine and sulfa drugs. Bandages were being used repeatedly. Wounded Germans screamed as they were treated, as there was nothing to dull the pain. Macaulay witnessed amputations with scarcely any anesthetic. Men clenched leather between their teeth, restrained by comrades, as bones were sawed with full awareness of the process. Such methods would seem medieval to the American Medical Corps. American medics had supplies of morphine, sulfa, appropriate bandages, and sterile tools. Wounded Americans were given anesthesia, antibiotics, and professional treatment. The Germans had to improvise with exceedingly limited resources, and their best efforts were well below American practice. On December 22, the Luftwaffe tried to deliver supplies by air to Peiper's Kampfgruppe. 6 aircraft flew at low altitude, dropping supply containers by parachute. The designated landing zone was supposed to be inside German-held territory. The majority of containers missed their target. They landed outside of the German perimeter. American troops retrieved them. German soldiers observed as supply aerial drops landed around 200 yards inside American zones, unreachable. The air resupply operation ended in total failure. Peiper's unit was now thoroughly cut off, hemmed in by American forces. No more fuel was coming, no ammunition, food diminishing, medical provisions depleted, no means to evacuate casualties, 170 American captives, and hundreds of German wounded and dead. The state of affairs was incapable of continuing. On December 23, Peiper conferred with his senior staff. Macaulay was there during the meeting. He listened as the German officers weighed their alternatives. None were favorable. Advancing further was impossible without fuel. They could not stand their ground for long, lacking ammunition. Withdrawal by vehicle was not an option. No fuel. Their only remaining prospect was a breakout on foot. This meant abandoning all gear. Tanks, half-tracks, transport, and wounded unable to move, plus American prisoners. Peiper reached his verdict. They would attempt escape on foot. Vehicles would be destroyed. The wounded would remain with American medical supplies. The American prisoners would be let go. The plan was to head east through the woods and hope to reach friendly lines. This was the sole path that offered his troops a survivable chance. The breakout commenced at 0200 on December 24. 800 German troops moved into the dark, through snow and woods. No motor transport, no heavy weapons, armed only with personal weapons and what they could physically carry. During this chaos, Macaulay managed to escape. He succeeded in reaching American forces on December 25. He immediately submitted an after-action report. In it, he described German logistics, the state of their equipment, troop morale, the food situation, and medical care. The document was thorough and correct. Macaulay eventually gave testimony at the Malmedy trial in June 1946. He spoke as a witness for the defense. He recounted Peiper's men's observance of the Geneva Convention towards him. He detailed the situation behind German lines, breakdowns of supply, the desperation, and the discipline shown by German forces fighting with inadequate support. Macaulay emphasized one point unmistakably. The Germans were not defeated at Stoumont by American tactical brilliance. They lost because they exhausted their resources. Gasoline, ammunition, nourishment, medicine all depleted. The Wehrmacht had become an 80-day force that no longer had the capacity to wage war. No supply chain meant no prospect of victory. Peiper left behind 7 Tiger II tanks at La Glaise, 50 medium tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 135 other vehicles. All immobilized due to empty gasoline tanks. Some of the best tanks in existence, left behind and made worthless. The tanks themselves were undamaged, operational, fully stocked with shells, but being out of fuel, became merely metal relics. Belgian citizens later collected the abandoned vehicles. Some were put on display in museums. Onlookers often wonder why the Germans abandoned these machines. The explanation is unchanging. They had no gasoline. The vehicles could no longer move. The crews could not remain. Thus, they were left. January 1945. A prisoner of war camp in France. General Hasso von Manteuffel sat in an interrogation chamber responding to queries from U.S. intelligence personnel. Manteuffel had been in charge of the 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes campaign. He was a dedicated military officer, a lifelong soldier, and a veteran of the Eastern Front. He had been opposed to the Ardennes operation from the outset. The American officers asked pointed technical questions. What were the German aims? What means were allocated? What led to failure? Manteuffel was candid with his answers. For him, the war was definitely over. He had no reason to prevaricate. His statements would later form part of the official foreign military studies records and historical documentation. Manteuffel clarified that he, along with Field Marshal Model, had disagreed with Hitler's concept. They had favored a contained operation, more limited goals, plans grounded in reality. Hitler insisted on the seizure of Antwerp, crossing the Meuse, splitting the Allied armies, and compelling negotiations. Hitler's aims were strategically not viable given the resources available. The allocation of fuel made victory unattainable. 5 million gallons for 3 army groups, 1,400 tanks, and thousands of other vehicles. Simple arithmetic revealed this was not enough. The planning had depended upon the capture of American fuel depots. Such faith was a huge risk. It is not feasible to plan a military assault based on the hope of capturing enemy stockpiles. What if American forces destroyed the depots? What if they remained hidden? What if their defense held? Every one of these circumstances took place. A number of depots were demolished. Some went undiscovered, others were secured. The petrol crisis started right away and never ended. Manteuffel stated his armored formations were urgently demanding petrol as early as December 19. On the second day, units were already depleted. Distributive convoys were failing to reach the combat areas. Only a fraction of captured fuel was available. The momentum of the entire operation was halted as panzers stood inactive, waiting for gasoline that was never to come. U.S. interrogators inquired regarding German logistics as a whole. Manteuffel was direct. German logistical support had broken down. It was not only the case during the Ardennes offensive but affected the entire system. This collapse had begun since 1943. Perhaps earlier, the Eastern Front had destroyed German logistics. The distances were immense. The roads were often unusable. The resistance from Soviet forces was overwhelming. German trucks failed more quickly than they could be fixed. Railway lines were attacked relentlessly. The Wehrmacht became reliant on horses. Hundreds of thousands of horses were harnessed to pull supply wagons, reminiscent of 1870. By the end of 1944, certain German units possessed more horses than units in World War I had owned. Mechanized battles were supplied by horse-drawn logistics. This inconsistency proved lethal. Tanks moved at speeds horses could not match. Panzers could travel 20 kilometers in 60 minutes. It took supply wagons an entire day to traverse that same distance. Fighting units outpaced their sustainment and subsequently had to halt, immobilized and waiting for supplies that reached them too late or not at all. Relying on horses gave rise to further difficulties. Horses needed nourishment. Each animal consumed roughly 20 pounds of fodder a day. A formation with 5,000 horses required 50 tons of feed each day simply to maintain its logistics. This fodder had to be shipped on roads already jammed with military vehicles. Horses perished from overwork, aerial bombardment, and insufficient nourishment. Carcasses obstructed routes and had to be cleared or disposed of. American supply relied exclusively on trucks. Trucks had no demand for daily feed. When unused, they consumed nothing. Their speed was greater, their payload more, and they required fewer maintenance crews than the horse-drawn carriages. The American fleet of trucks ran into the hundreds of thousands. All were standardized in design. All shared interchangeable components, all backed by a huge spare parts supply organization. Allied strategic bombing only exacerbated the situation. Any rail junction was a bombing objective. Bridges were all targeted and destroyed. Roads were strafed continually by fighter bombers. German supply units were forced to travel only at night. Daytime movement meant almost certain destruction from aerial attack. American P-47s and P-51s struck at anything visible. Convoys carrying supplies were incinerated. Refueling vehicles were annihilated. Supply convoys were raked with gunfire. German manufacturing was unable to replenish. Losses mounted. Factories fell under attack from bombers. Essential raw materials became difficult to find. Skilled laborers were drafted into the armed forces. The industrial system was falling apart. Even goods that factories managed to turn out often never made it to the troops due to shattered transport systems. Manteuffel contrasted this with American supply arrangements. The Americans enjoyed safe supply chains. Their factories were thousands of miles 3,000 from combat zones, unaffected by bombing, churning out war material at rates Germany could not rival. Ships crossed the Atlantic unceasingly, bringing cargo. Just the port at Antwerp moved more tons monthly than all German harbors put together. American depots existed everywhere. Petrol, munitions, rations, replacement parts, all efficiently organized, plentiful, and with built-in redundancy. Many depots meant the loss of one hardly mattered. Supplies came in standardized crates, allowing troops to handle them with minimal training. With immense manufacturing, wastage was acceptable if it increased distribution speed. German logistics had no surplus. Each dump of supplies was vital. Every fuel transporter was irreplaceable. Every meal ration was tallied. The Wehrmacht worked under the constant threat of collapse. One mishap spelled crisis. A pair of disruptions spelled catastrophe. The U.S. officers asked Manteuffel when he realized Germany was bound to lose. Manteuffel responded that by 1943, after Kursk, he knew success in battles remained possible but the war was out of reach. Winning overall demanded what Germany did not possess: industrial scale, oil, food, manpower, and time. The Americans had all of these. Their industry was virtually boundless. Oil came securely from Texas and the Middle East. They had farm output to feed civilians and troops alike. Their people numbered 130 million. There was time to organize and dispatch that populace to war. Germany had been beaten for resources before the military defeat became final. When America got involved, Germany's downfall was unavoidable. Not instantaneous, nor achieved with ease, but inescapable. The equation was straightforward. America could make more tanks, airplanes, bullets, and food than Germany could eliminate. In the end, American material dominance would grind German resistance to nothing. The Ardennes push amounted to a reckless final attempt. The remaining reserves were thrown in, hoping for a singular triumph to compel Allied negotiation. Hitler maintained that resolve and daring could overcome being outgunned. Manteuffel was clear-eyed. Determination and bravery count, but supply is of greater consequence. With no provisions, soldiers can't keep fighting, regardless of courage. The campaign failed. German casualties were devastating. 600 tanks were lost or given up. Fatalities mounted to 34,000, with 60,000 more missing or wounded. The Wehrmacht's last mobile troops were spent. Post-Ardennes, Germany could do nothing but withdraw. Offensive capacity was gone, as were large-scale plans. Remaining activity was stalling actions until the inevitable conclusion. Manteuffel was requested to author exhaustive analyses of the Ardennes campaign. 5th Panzer Army's tactics, planning, carrying out operations, and extracted lessons were all documented. He produced 148 pages, then an added 161 pages. These became the Foreign Military Studies manuscripts B151 and B151A. These documents provided expert military analysis, balanced critique, full recognition of American achievements, and frank assessment of German blunders. His assessments were calm, removed, and technical. He critiqued where Germany failed. He acknowledged Allied accomplishments, avoided excuses or propaganda, and confined himself to stating facts. He reported what occurred and explained causality. He identified the errors and outlined the outcomes. Some other German high command members were less forthcoming in remarks made after the war. Their accusations fell on Hitler, poor weather, misfortune, or any scapegoat except the fundamental issue. Germany was structurally unable to maintain modern war against resource-superior opponents. Manteuffel refrained from alibis. He related the facts. Germany's defeat resulted from being outbuilt, out-resourced, and outlasted. In December 1944, German forces remained tactically sharp, but lacking strategic supplies doomed any excellence to eventual failure. The questioning ended. Manteuffel was returned to the POW camp. He would spend another year held by Americans, then be released, return to Germany, and go on to a lengthy post-war life. He lectured at West Point in 1968. He contributed to documentaries. He persisted as a career soldier delivering candid evaluations until his passing. His legacy was his forthrightness. Unlike most German commanders who retroactively justified shortcomings, Manteuffel stuck to the truth. The Ardennes operation was undone by supply problems. The entire war was lost due to manufacturing limits. Tactical skill could not offset inadequate material support. February 6, 1946, Nuremberg, Germany. SS Obergruppenführer Joseph Dietrich sat in his cell awaiting his trial. Dietrich led the 6th SS Panzer Army during the Ardennes battle. A former butcher and Hitler's one-time bodyguard, he advanced beyond his abilities. An American psychiatrist, Leon Goldenson, interviewed Dietrich. Goldenson was studying the mental state of Nazi war criminals. He interviewed Dietrich on February 28. Their discussion touched on many subjects: the war, National Socialist beliefs, and the defeat in the offensive. During this, Dietrich made a grimly witty observation about his command. "We call ourselves the 6th Panzer Army because we have only 6 panzers left." This was black humor, but truthful. The battle had decimated his forces. Losses were extreme, material gone, personnel dead or captured, and what remained barely met the definition of an army. Dietrich was not renowned for grand strategy. Hermann Göring later remarked, "He is decent but foolish. At most he could command a division." Hitler gave him an army. The outcome was inevitable. 6th Panzer Army was intended to spearhead the main attack. Instead, it stalled at the outset. Substandard planning, congestion, insufficient fuel supplies, resistance from the Americans. Dietrich's forces were designated fuel for journeys of 90 to 100 miles. The stretch to Antwerp measured 140 miles. Even if flawless, the allotted gasoline fell short. Strategy relied on seizing enemy fuel stores. Without those, the attack was doomed from the start. The entire endeavor was constructed upon capturing U.S. supply points. This dependence illuminated German logistical insolvency. Planning with faith in capturing opposition supplies is not genuine strategy but desperation. Career officers such as Manteuffel recognized this. Political promotions like Dietrich did not. Goldenson questioned Dietrich about what caused the offensive's failure. Dietrich pointed to almost everything but supply. He cited air attacks by Americans, bad weather, rough terrain, and Hitler's excessive demands. Those were all legitimate issues. Nevertheless, he omitted the main reason. His formation ran out of fuel because the German system could not support its needs. Both German and American historians, after reviewing the event, arrived at the shared finding. The Battle of the Bulge failed first and foremost due to supply issues. Deficiencies in fuel put an end to the push. Insufficient shells limited artillery firing, and food shortages sapped troop stamina. Medical rationing meant that treatable wounds often turned fatal. Tactical German performance was regularly commendable. Particular formations fought bravely. Leaders made sound judgments within the available means. The rank and file displayed determination and competence, yet no tactical ability can remedy a logistics breakdown. An army short of petrol cannot press on. An army missing ammunition cannot take the fight to the foe. An army denied sustenance cannot continue in battle. Victory in the Ardennes came to the Americans not just from better battlefield tactics, but by having better supply systems. They shuffled reinforcements into place faster than the Germans could push forward. They kept their strongpoints well supplied. Wounded and lost were replenished quickly from existing reserves. They powered through adverse winter weather that worsened German difficulties. U.S. supply in late 1944 functioned as an evolved system. It was the product of 5 years' growth, vast infrastructure, dedicated logistics troops, special vehicles, standardized logistic procedures, and depot systems laid out tactically across Europe. Supply routes channeled goods from American industry to frontline positions within weeks. April 1945. American Interrogation Headquarters, Germany. Joachim Peiper sat opposite U.S. interrogators, responding to queries about Kampfgruppe Peiper's actions. The conflict was coming to its conclusion. Germany was in dissolution. Soon Peiper would have to answer for the Malmedy massacre. For the moment, the Americans were concerned with tactical accounts. Peiper gave a thorough breakdown of the operation, including planning, carrying out orders, problems arising, and choices made. He was responsive, professional, and candid. There was no hostility or avoidance, just straightforward accounts between two groups of soldiers. The Americans inquired specifically about fuel. At what point did you deplete your supply? Where did you find more? Which storage depots did you seize? Peiper described the crisis he faced regarding fuel. Bullingen provided 50,000 gallons, which sufficed to get to Stavelot. Reaching Stavelot, however, he discovered no significant depot. Only small fuel caches scattered along routes. It was insufficient. He pressed on westward, running with virtually nothing. Arriving at Stoumont, his columns ran entirely out. An American officer asked Peiper if he had been aware of the depot in Stavelot. 3 million gallons located just 800 feet from his line of march. Peiper replied in the negative. The American then revealed the depot's placement on a map, pointing out that thousands of jerrycans were arrayed beside that road, in that specific location. Peiper came within 300 yards. Peiper examined the map for a significant period. Afterwards, he gave a slight shrug, offered a faint smile, and said in English, "I am sorry." The interrogator inquired about his reason for missing it. Peiper replied that he had anticipated the fuel to be amassed in the town, stored in the central square as it had been at Bullingen. When he failed to locate it there, he concluded that the Americans had removed it. It never occurred to him to search for jerry cans piled up beside a roadside. The interrogator jotted down notes. Peiper went on to recount what happened next. The movement towards Stoumont, the surrounding maneuver, the choice to escape on foot, abandoning all vehicles, retreating through the woods back to German territory. Peiper did not voice remorse over the overlooked depot. There was no sign of disappointment or agitation, just a tactical mistake described from a professional standpoint. He let an opportunity pass. Such things are part of war. One moves forward. Nevertheless, that lost chance altered the engagement. With 3 million gallons, Kampfgruppe Peiper might have refueled multiple times, kept pressing on, possibly crossed the Meuse River, and attained the breakthrough which was the offensive's aim. Or perhaps not. Even with all the fuel he wanted, Peiper still ran up against American opposition. Once the weather improved, there was American air superiority. American reinforcements were arriving at a speed he could not match. While logistics were vital, they were not the sole factor. Fuel by itself would not have secured victory in the battle. Yet, it would have modified the result. The Germans would have penetrated further, inflicted more casualties, seized additional ground. The fighting would have dragged on longer. The larger strategic picture would have shifted. All because Peiper went past 3 million gallons of fuel and failed to detect it. The depot was present, clearly visible, within easy reach, left undefended. He drove by within 300 yards and completely failed to spot it because his expectations aligned with a German-style depot. Organized layouts, buildings, sentries. The American depot was simply fuel, stacked, available, ready. No installations were necessary. That exemplified American logistics. Straightforward, effective, plentiful. No wasted labor on constructions that did not aid the mission. Supplies were delivered to where they would be used. Soldiers would determine their use. German logistics operated with more complexity. It relied on formalized structures, specified resupply points, official channels. When every component functioned, the system worked, although it was easily broken. If any element failed, everything collapsed. In contrast, American logistics was robust, overlapping, adjustable. The existence of numerous depots rendered the loss of one insignificant. By standardizing containers, soldiers could distribute materials without requiring extra training. Abundant manufacturing meant that some loss was tolerable if it meant swifter supply delivery. These were foundational contrasts in philosophy. German logistics prioritized command and optimization. American logistics prioritized magnitude and rapidity. Over a lengthy conflict, the American method prevailed. The questioning concluded. Peiper was escorted back to custody. He would go on to stand trial, be found guilty, serve a sentence, then gain freedom, and live for many years after the war. He died in France in 1976 under ambiguous conditions. His military service was meticulously recorded, his battlefield decisions critiqued, his mistakes and triumphs documented. Missing the Stavello fuel depot was his most significant tactical error. Not a failing in morality or a war crime, but a blunder. He searched in the wrong area, assumed incorrectly, missed a chance that had the potential to alter the battle. That error represented the broader German defeat. The Wehrmacht was searching for something non-existent. Their assumption was that American logistics mirrored their own: dense supply points, official buildings, foreseeable routines. However, American logistics functioned differently, spread out, adaptable, plentiful. The K-ration was a symbol of such a system. It was not the cause of the Allied win, but it served as an emblem of how America succeeded. In 1944, 105 million K-rations were manufactured. Each had 2,830 calories divided among 3 individually wrapped meals, produced in U.S. plants, beyond reach of bombing, sent over the Atlantic, and distributed to troops across several continents at once. To German troops, opening these boxes meant food. They should have recognized industrial potential, transportation systems, and an economy capable of monthly producing millions of meal kits and sending them to any location. Little luxuries like chocolate, cigarettes, and gum indicated surplus capacity. America could include extras since output was so great. By 1944, German field rations revealed a crumbling system: insufficient food value, subpar quality, sporadic delivery, reliance on field kitchens that sometimes couldn't operate. Each aspect showed shortage and manufacturing stress. By the time of Germany's surrender in May 1945, Wehrmacht forces were starving. Rations had utterly failed. Distribution had totally broken down. Numerous German POWs gained weight while held by Americans due to regular meals for the first time in months. As one German prisoner said, "When I was captured, I weighed 128 lb. After 2 years as an American prisoner of war, I weighed 185. I had gotten so fat you could no longer see my eyes." In fact, rations at American prison camps surpassed German frontline rations. The Battle of the Bulge came to a close in January 1945. German troops retracted to their original locations. American troops launched counter-offensives. By March, Allied armies had advanced over the Rhine. By April, they had encircled Berlin. In May, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Ardennes operation used up all of Germany's last major reserves while failing to accomplish strategic goals. It held back Allied progress for a few weeks and caused losses. Still, it did not alter the ultimate outcome. The elite units sent to the Ardennes constituted the finest Germany had remaining. After the campaign, those formations no longer existed, wiped out, dispersed, rendered incapable of continuous action. Meanwhile, American strength continued to build. More units transferred from the U.S., more gear, more provisions. The logistics apparatus remained steady. At the time of Germany's capitulation, American forces in Europe had reached their highest readiness and supply levels. The loss of World War II by Germany resulted from an inability to maintain modern conflict against enemies supported by much greater manufacturing and logistical resources. Major strategic blunders and tactical slip-ups played a part, but the root problem was financial. Both America and the USSR had economies able to turn out the equipment of war more quickly than Germany could ruin it. Germany did not have that asset. This imbalance dictated the result. American logistical advantage went beyond feeding troops. Take vehicles as an example. The U.S. created 400,000 trucks during the war. German industry managed 140,000. American manufacturers produced 63,000 tanks. Germany built 46,000. Yet, German tanks needed higher maintenance, consumed more fuel, demanded more replacement parts. Tanks from America were less complicated, more dependable, and could be kept running in difficult conditions. The difference was even more pronounced with aircraft. The U.S. made 300,000 military planes during the war. Germany made 100,000.